So last year I came and I talked about a project that we'd just gotten started. So this is a bit of an update, this talk, where I'm going to talk about what we've learned in using xAPI in a real educational scenario, okay? So we just want to make sure that anyone else who is trying to do what we've been trying to do doesn't make all the same mistakes that we made in the first year, and just bootstrap faster into actually being able to use xAPI if you want to. So it's a bit of just how you can actually go through this. So the project is quite a large project. It's funded by the Office of Learning and Teaching, which is a research body in Australia that is really pushing learning analytics and educational sort of research. It's been very influential in terms of driving collaboration across institutions around educational development and research development. I want to start this talk with a bit of background. So this is a class that I was teaching maybe 3 years ago, and it was our flagship new first year science degree. So they had unlocked everything for this degree. Our e-learning guys had turned on this beautiful Blackboard site. They'd enabled all of the functionality that is normally turned off. They'd set up everything. It was all really beautiful. And so collaborative learning spaces, you know, participatory design, no exams for the entire first semester, you know, very modern pedagogy for the whole push. So I put them all into groups. We have an activity trying to get them all formed. So essentially they had a whole heap of group-based assessment. And what do you think was the first thing they did when they formed their group? They exchanged Facebook accounts. And so the assumption that e-learning was making, that they were going to find a whole heap of data and a whole heap of stuff about what these students were doing, was just utterly flawed, because the entire interaction that was going on in these cohorts was going on somewhere else. It was going on beyond the LMS, right? And so the question I want you always to be asking yourself when you're doing learning analytics is, have I actually got the data I think I've got? Because most of the time from an e-learning context, you've only got a tiny little fraction, right? So be a little bit aware of that. So this is a problem that learning analytics needs to confront, and our project is aiming to do that. There's a second problem, and it's not just the students behaving badly, it's the teachers as well, right? So at QUT at least, pretty much all of the people who are really well-respected pedagogy, really well-respected sort of advances in their approaches, they all just stopped using the learning management system years ago. They hate it. We've all got Blackboard, you know. They hate Blackboard. Why on earth would they confine themselves to Blackboard? So they head off and they set up these really beautiful WordPress sites, or they make like, you know, Mandy Lupton, who's one of the project partners, she sets up these really nice Google groups, big connected learning sort of push, really pushes what they're all doing, and gets these really nice sort of interactive experiences. Kate Davis over here, so she's one of the people who's actively trialling our toolkit at the moment. She sets up a beautiful WordPress blog. She has these weekly Twitter chats for her for her master's students. Whole heap of weird interactions, heaps of data. None of it's in the learning management system. Okay, so you know, these people are breaking our models. Okay, so this project is aiming to help these people who are the people who are really driving pedagogy and trying to do new, interesting things, giving them the tools to actually make use of learning analytics, because if we can help these people, we're likely to get some really interesting outcomes out of the field. So, the Connected Learning Analytics Toolkit is the proposal, or this is the thing we're actively building. And the basic idea is we interface with social media APIs to pull the data into a learning record store. So we're using xAPI because it's a very nice way of pulling your data together into a unified format. We do some analytics on it, and we give people contextualized. So there's dashboards for students where they can understand their own learning processes. There's dashboards for the staff, which are aggregating. And then, you know, if the admin people want to go and look at the LRS, they can, but, you know. There's not much in an LRS. Has anyone noticed this in terms of analytics? So, you know, from a learning analytics perspective, and this is one of the first lessons we learnt out of this project. An early assumption we'd all made was, oh, so we build the reporting on the LRS, right? but no, you actually pull the data out and you do your analytics at the higher level. So this is an early thing to have learned. Okay, so how does that work? Students, one of the really nice things about using social media from an ethics and privacy perspective is you don't know who they are. So unless you can actually give students a really nice reason to actually hand their learning data over to you, they're not going to, which makes me very happy. Normally it makes people really unhappy because they've got a whole heap of data sets that are missing a whole heap of data. From my perspective, that just means we need to work harder. So why on earth should a student hand over any learning data to you if you're not actually helping them learn? So there has to be something in it for them. Okay, so point is, this is a bit of an old interface, but the basic idea is student goes, student goes and they create an account where they enter a username, they essentially associate particular social media accounts with that particular account. And they actually get, so for example with Twitter, they know exactly which hashtags are going to be scraped. So we don't take all their data, we just take the data that's relating to the learning activity, okay? So actually we have a trial running, which I'll show you a link to in a minute, but we're running the toolkit at the moment for the conference as a learning activity. So if you want to go and try it out, you can go and sign up and tweet to LAK'16 and you'll see data. Anyway, okay, so student signs up, then they go and tweet to some pre-specified hashtags, for example, or maybe they go to a YouTube video discussion forum and post there, or there's a learning activity that drives this. The stuff comes out as xAPI statements, and then we do some sort of analytics on that, okay? And we give them dashboards to help them understand. So that's the basic idea. So a bit more background, Experience API. You're all in the Experience API session. Who knows what Experience API is? Just as a show of hands. Okay, I'm kind of impressed. I was expecting there'd be a lot more people who had no idea what it was and they were kind of like, I want to come and find out about Experience API because everybody keeps tweeting about it. So this is essentially a data standard that's intended to replace SCORM, really. So it's the background around learning data was if we're only collecting our learning data in pre-specified SCORM activities, we're missing a lot. There's a lot of restrictions in the old standards. And so this was a new standard that came out a few years ago as a formal release. It's open source, so you can participate in the development of this standard, right? So it's much more flexible than SCORM, which is a plus and a bit of a minus, okay? So, you know, the normal story is you make some JSON statements, active verb, object, blah, 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 but you can store a whole heap of other stuff. And if you want to go and look at the kinds of things you can do, a good place to start is just to go and read the spec. And you can, because it's open and it's on GitHub and off you go. So that's good. This is a problem, though. That anything is very dangerous, okay? So while we have the freedom to store anything, we have the freedom to store anything. Now, from a learning analytics perspective, that's highly problematic because actually what we really want to head towards is analytics that can work over multiple platforms, that we can use in a very interoperable way, maybe across educational systems. Open learning analytics as a movement is very important. We don't want to keep reinventing the wheel at every institution. We want to be able to use. So we need to start understanding what's going on with this anything, and we need to get a little bit stricter about this anything. Okay, so background completed. What is the point of this paper, okay? We are actually trying to give you just a bit of an idea about how we went about doing this and the experiences we've had in designing statements, the importance of being very careful about that data structure and in particular that context. And also the importance that there be things like recipes and profiles and common defined vocabularies that you can access, right? So many people know there's a competing specification, IMS Caliper, and it's very strong on that stuff. So the question becomes, how can we actually, how can we bring these two communities together? Because there's good things in both of them. Okay, so that being said, am I going to move? Yes. If you want to try the toolkit and go and play around with it, there is a link. You can go and sign up to our learning activity. Essentially, there is a Twitter scraping that will be going on for CLA Toolkit, LAK'16, and something else. I can't read it. My screen grab is a bit hard to actually, but yeah, if you go there, you'll see what will get scraped. If you tweet to it, eventually it'll show up in your dashboard and you can see what you've been doing. You can see how you've been interacting. But you know, the other thing to note is this is the ethics statement that our students see as they sign up. One thing that is worth thinking about is what should an ethics statement look like. Our ethics guys are very insistent that a very large, clunky thing get generated, which no students ever read. So, you know, what is your informed consent at this point? Aneesha, who is sitting over there in the corner hiding, did a very nice job working out a way of giving them the minimal statement but giving them the full statement at the same time, so they can expand and contract, but they're not terrified by this wall of text confronting them when they log on. And I consider that actually a nice mix between the two. But yeah, I suspect that our ethics guys would actually complain if they saw that now. I'm not actually sure. So we're showing them. So there's an interesting discussion to be had there. Okay, so how do I use xAPI? Who is thinking that right now? With caution. You go and use it. This is the trick, right? So you go and play and you learn things. Okay, so how many people have seen a statement like that about xAPI? Yeah. No, I hate that statement, okay? So, bad statement. This is not how you use xAPI, okay? So sure, the specification is saying that you must have subject, verb, and object triples. That's fine. There's a whole heap of optional things in the specification. When it comes to learning analytics, those optional things are not optional, okay? You know, so seriously, as a community, we need to change that dialogue. So timestamps would be a classic one, a really obvious thing there. According to the spec, you could include them, but you don't have to. If you're doing learning analytics and you're not getting timestamps, you know, pretty much everything that we do depends on time. Okay, so has anyone seen this picture? So this picture is emerging at the moment. So one of the things that's happening in xAPI is a move towards understanding vocabulary and how it affects things like recipes and profiles. This is a freely available, so this is a Git book that's been made as a proposal for a companion specification for xAPI. And when it comes to how do I use xAPI, this companion specification proposal is actually a very rich source of information about how you could use xAPI. Because what it's showing you is that if you're using xAPI for your system, essentially you need to worry about vocabulary, and a lot of people worry about that. So they go and they write lists of these are the verbs I'm using, these are the, you know, whatever. But within that, there's actually some complexity here, right? So the vocabulary is only the beginning. There's also the structure and how these things are interrelating. There's also format. There's also what's the semantics of these statements that you're generating becomes a problem here, right? So this diagram, there's a bit of debate in the community about this diagram, but essentially what it's saying is for your community, well, for your interesting thing that you're doing, so this would be in a community of practice potentially, but it could be for a project, which is how we're using it. You need to be essentially developing profiles which could have vocabularies. Ideally, you'd be reusing existing vocabularies. There'll be a number of recipes associated with that higher level profile. So for us, for example, we're essentially defining what I would be considering a profile now. We called it the recipe at the time because we didn't know what we were talking about. Plus, this isn't clear. And there is actually some slop between what a profile is and what a recipe is. But essentially what you're talking about is these are how you do things, and this is the overarching thing. So for example, I would see the caliper specification and how these two things meet. Caliper is a profile, it's a high level profile for education. So that's good. We can map between those two. That's nice. Okay, so how do you use it? You need to think about this stuff, and we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. So for example, one of the major things that we have spent the year doing, and even before that, so the paper I presented last year was all about how we're doing this data mapping across these different things, across Twitter and Facebook and stuff. So the semantics of student X posted a tweet, say, or student X tweeted, student X posted to Facebook. Is that the same thing? I would claim essentially they're semantically very similar, okay? So we need to start having these discussions about what is the same thing, because then we can start doing analytics at a higher level aggregated point. Okay, so what we've been doing a lot of work, and Aneesha has done the bulk of the driving here, hiding again, is put a lot of thought into how these structures need to actually work for our particular application. And you know, the paper is sort of talking about how we've actually gone and described the active verb object plus timestamp and context for our particular implementation, okay? Context is key, it's very important. So the classic thing that comes up here for me is, okay, so there's the active verb object stuff going on. Look at this bit here though. That's where the bulk of the driving is coming from, okay? So if you go looking here, that's actually where most of your analytics is living, in these statements. So that's the context. Now the problem with context is it's very freely defined, you know, what is it exactly? So anyone implementing context differently across different educational institutions is going to lead to us not being able to use the same analytics platforms across those different sets of data, okay? So context is very, very important and not being talked about enough when people are implementing xAPI. Okay, so back to active verb object plus other stuff, and the other stuff is very important, and how we specify that other stuff is vital. Okay, so lessons. You don't have to read, I'm not going to read that. Point is, context is not optional. When you're doing learning analytics, context is where all of your stuff lives, essentially, or the vast bulk of it is. Things like, you know, teams, instructors, platforms, the relationships between things, all of these types of things, they're all coming through with that context bit. Same thing with timestamps. Don't leave these things out, people, okay? The richer you can get there, the better. But if you're careful about how you do that, you can start doing some very sophisticated analytics, but you need to put a lot of thought into that data structure as you're building, okay? Things like mentions, hashtags, tags for us were very important because we're doing social media. How do we model that? Where's the data model? Okay, so there's ambiguity in terms of what's a relationship. So if someone's replying to someone else, how are you going to store that in your statements? Okay, recipes, essential. Okay, this is the lesson. This is the lesson. You do not do xAPI stuff without thinking about your data format before. That has to come first. Okay, so that is the bulk of the lesson. So if you go looking through the actual xAPI specification, you go reading through, okay, so active verb object, okay, sure, they're required. And then I go down here and I'm like, context and timestamp optional. And I go, oh, a little bit of me dies every time I see that, okay. So what did we do? So we have actually published, on GitHub, there's essentially a recipe that is associated with the GitHub project for the toolkit, which is talking about our data structure that we're using. It evolves, so as we add new things, we have to reconsider what's going on and stuff is changing, but you can go and look it up. That's all fine, it's all there. Again, I'm pretty sure, and I was talking to Megan Bowe about this, I'm thinking of it as a profile now, but it doesn't really matter, you know. Russell Duhon hates that diagram that I showed you, even though it's in the spec that he built, or the document that he wrote. Let's not get into arguments here. The important thing is you start thinking about your data structure. Okay, so once we've got that, we've got a common vocabulary that can talk about things like microblogging as a recipe, content authoring, content curation. Okay, so we've got these ways we're talking about what we're doing there. That's good. And once you do that, it's really easy. So, we spent months thinking about what we were doing with the data structure, and then Aneesha wrote dashboards in, I don't know, it took you, 2 weeks, Aneesha? Probably faster, I reckon. So once we had the idea of what we were doing, it was very easy to pull out some dashboards and do some stuff. So here's actually some data from a class that was using the toolkit last semester. What do you think's going on here? Anyone want to guess which lecturer I'm talking about at the moment? Anyway, big shout out to Kate Davis. She's fantastic. She's trying it. She loves it. She's very engaged in helping us develop. These are her weekly or fortnightly, I think they were, Twitter chats, where you get these like massive spikes in activity. Okay. And it's quite interesting because it looks like it's a really good form of activity. They're all interacting and engaging, but when you actually go looking at the content analysis of that stuff, the interactions were quite shallow. So that was actually very useful for her to find out. Okay, so we can do things like temporal analysis, and if you go and have a look, or I can show you later if you want, you'll all have student accounts, so you won't get to see all of the pretty stuff I'm showing you at the moment, but you'll get to see something. We can do content analysis, so we can do some topic modelling, we can pull out some sentiment stuff. They always ask for the word cloud. Okay, fine, I don't really care about word clouds, whatever. But so this is actually the data that has been coming in from the LAK'16 course, right? So the unit we're running for you lot right now. So I kind of just, Dragan's already a member of the, as is Shane, as is Abelardo, so I just kind of imported them in. I kind of violated their ethics, but whatever. He's already signed over anyway. So what you can see here is a topic that's emerging in the stuff that's being collected. Anyone want to guess what's going on with that topic? Anyone want to tell me what the topic is about? And this is a problem, right? So when you take these things to educators, how you actually get them to understand it can be problematic. But this is interesting. This is kind of like a lace privacy ethics thing potentially. You can sort of play around and go, oh, okay, there's a bit of a theme there. If you come down to some of the other ones, you see things like, oh, this is obviously about an xAPI theme. This is obviously a LAK'16 kind of eventy theme. And so whenever you rerun the topic model, you see a few different things coming out. That's, sometimes a bit hard for educators to understand, sometimes quite interesting for them. So we're doing a lot of testing around, does this help you? Does this make sense to you? What would you need? And this is actually a second iteration of the content analysis, because the original one was really pretty, they loved it. But when you actually got them to explain what was going on in there or try to interpret it, they had no real idea what was going on, and it was quite hard to explain what was going on as well. So this was an idea Aneesha came up with recently that I'm quite keen on. The other nice thing about this is you can change the number of topics, so you can see different things naturally emerging, and that comes from her PhD work. So excellent. Anyway, sentiment analysis, positive, negative effect, okay, whatever. I'm not a big believer in it. Anyway. But actually, this is quite interesting from an educational perspective, because if you can actually trust that sentiment analysis, you can start to get a bit of an idea of what's going on in your class. So potentially as that evolves, it might become more useful. Social network analysis is going quite nicely. I'm very happy with that at the moment. So what we can do, anyone want to guess who these two dots are, by the way, in terms of the social network analysis? Oh, thank you. So we can do all of that, we can pull it out. You can click on a link and you can actually see what's going on in terms of what caused that link. I'm going to speed up because I've only got 1 minute now. I thought I had more. A proposal of this paper was this mess of vocabulary in the xAPI community needs to be cleaned up. And we need to start using things like semantic web. There's a whole heap of technology we can pull in here and make use of to actually start cleaning up this mess of it. And so we submitted the paper. When was the LAK deadline? I don't know, November? I don't know. So we submitted the paper proposing that this happen. And at the same time, I only found out about this like months later, of course, but at the same time, the companion specification was released, which was proposing the same thing, okay? And this is what I really like about an open development methodology here, right? Because anyone can add to the specification, this stuff is moving really quickly. I became very happy with the xAPI community when I found out about this, because this is actually exactly where we need to be going, and it was done because anyone could do it, right? Next steps. Well, we'll keep getting more data, we'll keep getting extra dashboard stuff. The focus for this year for me is really about how can we actually take this stuff back to the educators and help them to actually make sense of it and act on it. Abelardo's big on action, so I'm sure he'll be pushing us there. But I'm much more interested in how can we use these dashboards in a pedagogically interesting way. So can we change pedagogy because of the data we're showing students? There's whole new things you could potentially do here. And we're really pushing for interoperability, which is where a lot of the tweeting has been coming from. Go to this Google thing if you want to read the statement that came out of the hackathon, which was essentially calling for data interoperability and calling for the communities, everyone involved in creating learning analytics data to actually take responsibility for this and to own interoperability as an agenda. If you agree with it, add your name to it. Please, that would be fantastic. And thank you.